Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm doing my tribute to Robert Miles by reviewing Dreamland, 23am, and Organik. You know, 2016 had a lot of celebrity deaths. I remember being shocked by the passing of David Bowie and Prince, even though I didn't actually listen to them that much outside of coming up on my dad's iPod and shuffle every now and then. I'm not going to say Robert Miles, real name Roberto Cancina, or however you pronounce it. I'm not going to say Robert Miles is exactly the electronic equivalent of either of those guys, but I'll be real, celebrity deaths in electronic music are a lot less common, mainly because the genre was the biggest in the 90s, and therefore most people from that era aren't that old yet. I mean, Robert Miles himself was only like 47, I think. I mean, I don't expect this to happen to artists I listen to on a regular basis. I mean, we had Pete and Amlook in 2012, that was, ooh. And then Edgar Froese, I think that was 2014, or 2015. That was less surprising because Tangerine Dream's been around for freaking forever, but yeah, this news was truly gutting when I first heard it. Like, you may recall that I included Dreamland in my favorites of all time list, number 97 to be exact. I don't have a lot to say about the album, to be honest, so that's why I included the other two albums that he still has available on Spotify to talk about in this video. I feel like I gotta pay tribute to this guy, even if it was mainly like the one album, or in my case, two albums, that really stuck with me. But let's just get right into it. Let's talk about Dreamland. This album admittedly doesn't have a lot to it. There are 10 songs on it. They all kind of follow the exact same formula. Piano melodies, satisfying trance build-ups and payoffs, and of course a dreamy and super uplifting and emotional atmosphere. But this formula was so consistently well done that Robert Miles ended up changing the game with this album, with his style influencing many other trance artists and other electronic artists. Most obvious one I can think of off the top of my head is ATB. But, like, even people like Gareth McGrillen of Knife Party crawled out to mourn the man's passing and say that he's one of the guys that started it all for him. And yeah, if it wasn't clear by the fact that I wanted to make this giant-ass tribute video for the guy, yeah, I also consider Dreamland to be a very significant part of my life. I think I might have first heard Dreamland in, like, middle school or something. Maybe early high school at the very latest. Well, actually my introduction to this guy was just seeing the original version of Children in iTunes Essentials. Not the Dream version that begins the album, and I think that's the one that most people know. I mean the original version that's near the end of the album. Like, it had this cool spaciness to it, and I love its, like, guitar loops. Do-do-do. 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 And all these little sparkly little synth riffs in the background. And it brought me in for so many repeat listens, I ended up getting the whole album later on. And while that track is still one of my favorites, it's probably not my favorite on there. Picking just one favorite on this album I don't think would really be possible, but like I think I have more feels towards some of the slightly deeper cuts, like Fable especially. But that track also has two different versions on this album. There's a part of me that doesn't really approve of repeating tracks like this album does, but you know what? Both Children and Fable benefit from the comparison between versions. In the case of Children, like, the two versions have pretty different vibes. Like, the Dream version is more piano-centric and starts out with this cool, distorted thunder sound. And of course, it has the same guitar loops, just to a less prominent extent. And like I said, it's based more around the piano melodies. And there's also like a more progressive style outro as well that, you know, I could see like that stuff having rubbed off on Tiesto, for instance. And Fable. The two versions of Fable aren't that different from each other. There's the message version, which has lyrics, and the dream version, which doesn't. And that's basically the only difference, but it is a big enough difference that the two versions feel different to me. And I love the melody of Fable so much that I don't really even care that the two versions are that similar. Do 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 do. And yeah, being the only song on the album with actual lyrics certainly doesn't hurt in terms of being a standout. Well, there is the track 1 and 1, which is a bonus track that isn't on the version I'm used to. That song's okay, I guess. And as for the other songs on this album, I mean, there isn't a lot to report, just following the same formulas, with some variety in tempo and key, like Fantasya is slower, Landscape has these squirty acid house-esque synths playing throughout, and Princess of Light. Oh man. You know, maybe this track is my favorite. It's got this dark and dramatic intro, but it slowly evolves into the catchy and uplifting piano-centric style the rest of the album goes for. And man, a lot of feels on that one. Got a ton of repeat listens there, and there's also In My Dreams, which that one took quite a while to grow on me. Just was kind of forgettable at first, but you know, it fits in. It has some interesting drum patterns. It's still a good song. And there's also In the Dawn. It has some darker melodies that I thought initially maybe this track stretched down a bit too long for its own good, but you know what? It doesn't make the melody on this track any less awesome. Love this one too. Also the ending, Red Zone, which doesn't have any piano, but kind of has this repetitive progressive synth riff instead, and you know, it still closes the album out on an emotional high note. I could end the review here and tell you to just check the album out. I mean, it is very feel-centric and simplistic, but it does the feel so fucking well, like, ugh. And I could just end the review there, but there was more to Robert Miles than just this one album, and he was a lot more diverse than that. So let's talk about the other two albums that I know, starting with 23am. This one also has a lot of nostalgia. Not quite as much as Dreamland, but it comes close. Like, I think I heard this one freshman year of high school, I think. But 23am and also has the benefit of being a lot more interesting and having a lot more to discuss. Feels like he was trying to do something more ambient, a bit more freeform and experimental. Something a lot like combining his style with that of FSOL. I think the final result is actually probably closer to maybe artists like Enigma or something. This album does obviously still sound like the work of Robert Miles, as heard as on the build-ups and guitar and piano melodies of A New Flower. But, like, this track also has some baby sound effects. It's not something he probably would have done on Dreamland. And, like, the intro, introducing, is it's got these progressive acid housey synths a lot of times, showing the guy trying his hands at some new sounds. And there's also a lot more vocal tracks, like, specifically centered around the vocals. He's got songs like the more down-tempo Everyday Life, which stretches on for like 10 minutes, and has quite a lot of cool things going on, like a lot of interesting ambient passages. And there's the infectiously catchy Freedom, which is easily my favorite track on the album. Always sing alongside this one. Free! Everyone is free! Yeah. Oh, another thing, all these songs flow together really tightly in a continuous mix. Like, Dreamland kind of does this too, but it tends to bookend its tracks with ambient effects, and it's really obvious when tracks begin and end. This is not the case on 23 AM. The mix is so tight and so well planned out that it's often hard to tell when tracks begin and end. And the fact that most of the tracks are already a lot more ambient-centric than before only enhances the effect. It's really like all 11 of these tracks fit together in one long, unbroken piece. Anyway, going back to individual tracks, Freedom leads directly into Textures. It's kind of like an experimental part 2 of Freedom. Lots of drum and bass, influenced drum patterns, and emotional piano melodies. Even some horns in some parts. The horns show up quite a bit on this album, and it's always really cool when it happens. There's Enjoy, which is another poppier vocal track like Freedom, but it's more non-linear and meandering, also darker and more dramatic as well. And then the ambient-centric and also kind of dramatic and dreamy Flying Away. The more straightforward ambient drum and bass of Heatwave, which also has some jazzy elements, leading directly into Maresias, which has even more horns and saxophones and is absolutely beautiful. And it all culminates in Full Moon, the climax of the album where things start out ambient and tranquil but get dark and brooding with some haunting vocals, and later really intense and trance-heavy. And the ending, Leaving Behind, is mainly just a reprisal of the tranquil ambience of the beginning of Full Moon, with some pianos added in later. A lot going on in this album, and it's all some beautiful and soothing stuff. While not quite the feels trip that Dreamland provides, it comes very close for me, and is absolutely worth your time. Now admittedly, these are the only 2 Robert Miles albums with any nostalgia. I never checked out any of his other stuff because the dude after this just made a complete departure in sound, and everything he released after 23 AM didn't sound like he was even the same person. But I was definitely interested in hearing his material after this, so let's talk about the guy's 3rd album, Organik, which is the only other one on Spotify, unfortunately. And yeah, at this point he'd broken off his record label and formed his own, Salt Records. There were 2 other albums he released after this, one with tabla player Trilok Gurtu, fittingly called Miles Gurtu, which looks like some pretty cool jazzy psychedelic stuff. And he also had one more solo album called 13. And I can't find either of these albums in their entirety. The former is on Spotify and iTunes, but not available in the US for some reason, so sucks for me. I've heard some snippets of 13, and it's like this super experimental guitar-heavy stuff that doesn't remotely resemble his early stuff in any capacity. It doesn't really seem to be my thing, to be honest, but Organik. I did enjoy Organik quite a lot. Again, basically no connection to Dreamland at this point. Maybe a tiny bit of influence carried over from 23 AM, but it feels like more like Robert Miles got inspired to do something like he saw FSOL come out with stuff like the Isness and Alice in Ultraland, which was also a pretty huge departure in style for them, and he wanted to do something similar, but maybe even more out there. And yeah, Organik is undoubtedly interesting. It really does remind me mostly of like late period FSOL, but maybe not quite. It's the closest comparison I have. It's like this experimental jazzy and rock influenced trip hop album, with even a full orchestra in some areas, and a lot of different world music influences in others. Goes into some really dark and creepy territory, but still really cool stuff all over this album. Now, I will admit I've only heard this album for the first time yesterday, so I have not exactly had the several years to digest this one, so I apologize for that. But it did always pique my interest, and I'm not sure why I waited until now to check it out. And like, these songs all seem to blend together pretty well. But like the Isness, while it is a dramatic change, it's still a very enjoyable one. If there's anything that might take away from the experience, I guess it would be like there's a lot of guitar work and it's really rough and harsh. But it just kind of added to the atmosphere for me, and there was all sorts of awesome bass lines on here. Bill Laswell even plays bass on a couple of tracks on here, which is pretty cool. Let's talk about the most interesting tracks. There's the first track, TSBOL, which has the above-mentioned full orchestra, as do the track Wrong, and to a less obvious extent, Pour te parler. Petit Palais, I don't French. There's the track Paths, which has actual vocals. Is like the only thing that calls back to his early stuff. Tiny bits of the material he made on 23 AM. And near the end of the album, we get into some weird Indian-style experiments, like Release Me. It has these sitars and tablas and awesome jazzy acoustic bass lines, but plenty of electronic tinges placed throughout. And there's also a two-part track called Improvisations, which is like this really abstract piece, but that reminds me of the Porcupine Tree song, Moonloop, where they just had this synth atmosphere and just kind of played some freeform jazz-type piece. It's really cool. The first part is more ambient, second part is more up-tempo, and almost kind of drum and bassy. And also the ending, Endless, it almost shows a little bit of that trance sound coming back in at the ending, but more like a Spangle-style Goa trance than the dreamy sound he became famous for, and even after that, it just kind of floats off into ambient and world music weirdness. And the rest wasn't quite as interesting to me. Maybe it'll grow on me with more repeated listens, but like, there were songs like Trance Shapes, which didn't even remotely sound like trance, but was like more of a heavy rock song, and a lot of the songs on here were like heavy rock experimental stuff. But it's still a really cool album. I think it's worth checking out. So it just goes to show what a talented and diverse musician Robert Miles really was. Sure, the album everyone knows already was really simplistic and feel-centric, but that doesn't mean he didn't show his impressive range on his later work like this. In my opinion, all three of these albums are absolutely worth your time, although they are all very different experiences, and while Dreamland is in no way a fair representation of what this dude has accomplished, damn, it was still a massive gut punch to hear the news of his passing, and now, anytime I listen to Dreamland, I wish I had listened to this. I wish I had recorded this video yesterday, because I wasn't in a great mood. I was thinking about finals, the weather was shitty, and I listened to Dreamland on the way to class, and I was almost tearing up, just thinking, my god, the album cover, came true. It's the dude's eyes superimposed on a picture of the sky, he's looking down on us from heaven now. I know for some of you, he wasn't much more than one song or one album to you, and to me he was mainly 2 albums. But I have all the respect in the world for this dude, and yeah, he is really gonna be missed. So, Dreamland is a solid 9, 23 AM is an 8.7, and Organik is an 8.3. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.